Hey, it's CrossFitTracking.com here to do a brief overview as well as a hands-on comparison between the Grit X and the Garmin Forerunner 945, as well as an app overview of the Garmin app experience versus the Polar app experience. And then I'll probably post that app experience analysis or comparison as its own separate video. But just to give you just a basic overview, we're going to highlight some of the primary differences between the 945 and the Grit X, and look at them sort of side by side and a hands-on. And just looking at the basic casing and just sort of physical differences, the Grit X is 47 millimeters wide, as is the 945. The 945 is listed as 13.7 millimeters thick, and the Grit X is listed as 13 millimeters thick, but you'll see very clearly that it's not. 945 comes in at 50 grams, the Grit X at 64 grams. The casing on the Grit X is a stainless steel front with a polycarbonate resonant basic plastic back, as well as the 945, which has primarily all plastic encasement, which makes up for the lighter overall build. They both offer 1.2 inch transflective screens. The battery life rating on the 945 is 14 days, which really comes in more like 7 to 9 days, depending on whether you have pulse ox turned on all the time and the smart recording set to 1 second, and the brightness of the backlight depends on that. The Grit X is rated at 7 days of average watch use, when really it's more like 4.5 to 5. The 945's 5 ATM water resistance, and the Grit X is now bumped up to 10 ATMs, or from the previous other types of Polar watch renditions. 10 is a little bit newer and higher. The 945 has the 22 millimeter quick fit, which just sort of snaps on and off, as well as the Grit X has the 22 millimeter quick release bands. 945 comes in at $599, but right now it's being sold for $549. So that's a sale right now. And then the Grit X is at $429. So looking at the basic differences, and I'll show you a little bit in the hands-on, but just to sort of summarize between the two. So there's a lot more customization in the 945. You can adjust watch faces, you can add widgets and applications, so you can do a lot more tweaking and hands-on there. The Polar Grit X has basic, screens. You'll basically be able to change the watch not by the look or appearance of the watch, but what the information around the watch looks like by scrolling through different screens. The only sort of widget-esque type item is a weather widget that's now been added on the Grit X. You still see the cardio load and you get your sleep. That's one primary difference with what you can see on the watch, is you don't get a sleep visualization on the watch itself for the Garmin 945. When you compare the overall health and wellness between the two, so the 945 has a basic sleep overview, but it also will give you your pulse ox levels, your oxygen levels throughout the night, and will also give you respiration rate. And you'll get those similar features in the Polar, but it comes in what's called a nightly recharge. So the sleep analysis takes into account respiration, so that's great, as well as a few other elements, which gives you a sleep score, which is fantastic about the Grit X, as well as the autonomic nervous system estimated regeneration, which is an assessment of your overall beat-to-beat intervals, as well as your heart rate variability throughout the night for a period of time. The one thing that's different about the 945 is it gives you a body battery, which basically is evaluating your heart rate variability over time and assessing it as a stress score. And then it'll summarize like how much depletion of your overall internal reserves is being accounted for through high level stress throughout the day, as well as workouts. They both give you a workout evaluation, which is great. Obviously for CrossFit tracking, we need to know our overall internal health, as well as how much of a load the workout put on us. So the Grit X actually will calculate a TRIMP score, which is just an evaluation of how much weight and strain was put on the heart during the workout. The 945 will give you a training effect score, both evaluating it from an aerobic impact as well as anaerobic impact, which is obviously very useful. They both track load over time, and we'll see some of the differences on how they assess it. The Grit X will basically give you a strain score, which is a summary of your accumulation of heart rate strain through the workouts over 7 days as compared to your overall fitness level compared over 28 days. Similar done here, but you don't actually get as much of the details of the calculation. So in the 945. So the 945 will give you a training load per workout, and it'll even break down what type of workout, whether you're working on high intensity or high aerobic or low aerobic or anaerobic focus to your workout. It'll give you some sort of labels to tell you what type of workout in general it was. But it doesn't quite give you the calculation for what goes into assessing the load score. But overall, it'll give you the load accumulation over a period of time, and it'll show you in green, you know, what the range of loads you should be targeting to have productive, you know, fitness growth and fitness development. When you look at both these devices, they both include barometric altimeters, but the 945 will actually assess your stairs, how many stairs you climb throughout the day. The Grit X just uses it during workouts. Like I said before, the pulse ox is included on the 945, so you can get your oxygen levels as an estimate of what's oxygen's in your bloodstream, and the Grit X does not include that. They both include notifications from the smartwatch. The 945 functions somewhat perfectly in receiving notifications, and they automatically appear on the screen so you can see them, but the Grit X actually has been very faulty in receiving the notification. It seems to disconnect from from the phone on a regular basis. I use an iPhone, so I'm getting notifications correctly or timely in about 50% of the time, and they don't automatically appear. You have to raise the wrist to be able to get those to be visible. The 945 obviously includes onboard music, so you can link to Bluetooth headphones and listen to music straight off the watch. You can download from Deezer and Spotify, and I think Amazon Prime, but I haven't messed with that. I just use Spotify. So that's good if you're going out for a run. Obviously, we're focused on CrossFit training and evaluation, so listening to music is not as much of a primary capability, but it has been nice, especially when you're stuck at home with stay-at-home orders, to be able just to listen to music right off your watch and not have to take your phone. The 945 will connect to Ant Plus and Bluetooth devices and sensors, so it makes it really easy to find a whole, you know, worldwide set of options for chest straps for heart rate accuracy. As the Grit X just connects to Bluetooth sensors and devices. You know, comparing the two watch bands, I really like the Quick Fit because you can just pop them off and pop them on. You can obviously buy any of these devices, whether it's 22 millimeter quick release or the Quick Fit. You can get those on Amazon relatively easily. I just like the Quick Fit better. When I looked at the heart rate evaluation of the two, and more of this is on the website on CrossFitTracking.com specifically under the Grit X page, the 945 is much more accurate from the standalone optical heart rate sensor. As I've said in a million videos, when you're doing a CrossFit workout, there's a lot of wrist flex and a lot of movement across the wrist, so you want to use a chest strap either way to get accurate scores for your workout as well as for your load accumulation. But the 945 is much more accurate in the 80% range, and the Grit X more in the 40 to 50% range for accuracy when using just the optical heart rate sensor. And then the other primary difference, as I've said in the reviews for the Grit X so far, is the backlight brightness. So the Grit X, basically, when you do a wrist raise, see it's on there. When you do a wrist raise, you get a backlight brightness that's not at all the full brightness. You actually have to push a button to get the full brightness of the backlight. When I test this with a light meter, the backlight brightness is somewhere around 0 to 1. When you push the button, you get a full backlight, like you can see on the 945 now. And if I enact it on the, the Grit X, you can see a backlight there. Oh, no. You can see a backlight. So it's about the same. When I compare the two, the backlight on the Grit X is probably more like if there was a 15% backlight setting on the 945. The 945, you can adjust from 20 up to 100% full brightness. And when you think about the comparison, when I do a full button press on the backlight here versus what you get here, the brightness on the 945 is considerably brighter when you turn the backlight up. If you were to just do it at 100% brightness, because again, we're testing the full capabilities of the watch, when you do a wrist raise and the backlight is 100% and you're just using the regular watch face, it produces 30.5 lumens. When you do a button press to get a full backlight on the Polar Grit X, it's 7.8 lumens. So think about that, it's about 25% or roughly something like that, brightness just on the watch face itself. And when you do a full white background and have the Garmin set to 100%, so it's a full white, so it's putting off as much light as humanly possible from each of the watches. On the Polar Grit X, you'll get 27.5 on the backlight brightness, and on the Garmin 945, you get 120 lumens. So considerably brighter, at least, the very least, much more customizable. And then obviously on the Grid X, on the wrist raised backlight, it's virtually non-existent or very, very minimal. It's only really useful in like a pitch black room, in my opinion. So hopefully they'll adjust that to where you can have a setting to adjust the wrist raise to include a full backlight without having to push the button to get it bright. They both include pretty good colors. There's been a change in the Grid X between the Polar Vantage series that was released previously. The colorization is better quality, so the blacks are a little more black and the colors are more crisp, as well as on the 945. The colors are crisp. It's not as much of the washed out experience on the blacks that you've had in other Garmin devices. So let's get into hands-on of the two side by side so you can see some of those differences, and then we'll get into a detailed review of the Garmin app versus the Polar app, and also looking at some of the scores and details from each of these devices. Okay, looking at these two side by side, you can see they're obviously the same basic width across, 47 millimeters. The bigger question is, how thick is the Grid X? And so if you were to place these on top of each other, and you know that the 945 is 13.4, something like that, they're 13.7 millimeters thick, and the Grid X is supposed to be 13. You can see that it stands out considerably thicker, and it feels that way on the wrist. Both of them use, some sort of pen-based band, so it's not a fixed band like there was on the Vantage series. So they both have the same flex across the wrist, which is good and useful, but obviously the thickness is much different. You can see, so this is set to 20% brightness. This is just the full backlight when you push the button. In real time or real life, it looks like this is just a hair brighter, just out of the box, just on the lowest setting, but obviously you can turn it up considerably brighter. On the back, you can see the new heart rate sensor from Polar, with the different colored diodes, and the same sort of sensor on the Garmin, is just regular 2 large green, as well as one that flashes red for pulse ox tracking throughout the day. They both include 5 buttons. Garmin uses the 3 on the left. Polar uses 3 on the right. So no significant differences there. But when you look at sort of the overall differences for functionality on the Garmin system, obviously you have widgets. So body battery, you can go into your VO2 max. The training status, that's your basic overall load, and it tracks your workouts across a period of time. It gives you the range for the optimal, how much load you want to be building over a 7-day period of time. And then it gives you focuses for where your areas of focus have been. So whether it's anaerobic, whether it's high intensity aerobic, or whether it's low aerobic, and there's a low aerobic shortage, as well as the recovery time is built right into the watch. If you were to compare that to the Grid X, you can tab over to the Training Load Pro, and it'll show you your score. The strain is the average accumulation of efforts over the last 7 days. Your tolerance is your 28-day moving average of how much your body can relatively withstand. Whenever this divided by this is greater than 1, it says you're overreaching. You can see it fills in that box. Whereas on the Garmin, obviously it tracks it a little bit differently just by showing you the range, and I'm still within the range, so it's saying I'm optimally working out or exercising. I've only done a few workouts on here, so it won't have a full accumulation, but that's just how it overall compares the two pieces of information. Back to the overall 945 functionality, you have the weather widget. You can add a bunch of different widgets. This is a health stat summary. You can see the pulse ox throughout the day, so you can click into it, and it shows, I've been just keeping this on at all times just to see if it has any worthwhile information. And it'll show you the red on the back. It's just sort of checking. There's the full brightness of the heart rate tracking. But you get a bunch of summary information. Obviously, one of my favorite things is the body battery. It takes into account your stress over a period of time. Ever since midnight, it shows you basically based on the stress that you've been experiencing throughout the day, how much depletion of your overall body battery has occurred. And it obviously goes through a bunch of stats. You get the same stats here. You get stairs. Obviously, you don't get that on the Grid X. And you get accumulation, your history log. These are the basic widgets that come just straight out of the box. Your last activity, you can adjust some of these things. The notification gets popped in here. You can do a compass, which I don't believe is a function that's available on the Grid X. Sunrise, sunset details. You just get, obviously, there's the, there's hydration. You can add the hydration widget, which I did. It's the only one that I've added so far. But when you compare it to the Grid X and what the information that's available on the watch, you have that basic Training Load Pro, which is a simple summary. you have your activity. So it's like a culmination. And I actually like the activity a lot because it takes into account your steps as well as your overall active time, amount of movement time, and your calories for the day. And it gives you total accumulation. I haven't worked out yet today, so I'm only at 24%. It's been an office day, so nothing to report great there, but I think it's a useful stat. You have a basic watch screen, and you have your weather widget. So the weather widget will come in. It shows you I was last updated at 3:45, so about an hour ago, and you get a couple of days, which is the same information you would get on the Garmin 245, so nothing significantly different there. FitSpark will give you recommendations for the day based on how you slept, and the sleep you can see here says I'm compromised, because my overall sleep was not as good as it normally is on average, and it shows you those informational tidbits here. One of the great things about the Polar system is you can dive into any of the details and look at your beat-to-beat intervals, your heart rate variability over the course of the night, or you can come back in here and see what goes into account for your sleep details, for the overall wake up, fall asleep, how much time you were asleep, if there's any disturbances, long interruptions, sleep cycles, REM. So it's a lot of great information. See, 5% deep sleep, that's why I had such a low score. A lot of information built into the watch, which is not available on the Garmin. But overall, very simple. This is your training log, so you can go back and look at different training activities. When you go to basically look at a workout, it'll show you the summary of all the information, which you can see as well in the Garmin. You can basically get to it on a few different ways. So you can go into your history tab, and it'll have all of the different activities that you experienced in that same activity built in here. You can see your training, all the different aspects in a list form, or you can go into training effect, and it'll show you the basic summary of the stats and the different ways that it helped your overall fitness increase. So looking at the two watches, just functionally using them day to day, I would say that the wrist raise backlight is an issue. So if you can see the backlight here, it's actually on right now. Obviously the Garmin, anytime you push a button, the backlight comes on as well. Here, see if I can get it to activate again. So the wrist raise backlight is on right now. There's the Garmin. You can set and adjust the backlight. You can make it a lot brighter. Functionally between the two, the fact that the notifications don't always come through on the Grid X and they don't automatically appear on the watch, you have to do a wrist raise, coupled with the backlight being very dim or basically non-existent on the wrist raise gesture, makes this for functionally day-to-day use not as good. But as far as overall fitness and development, I somewhat like the Garmin approach a little bit more. I like it better because there's more accuracy on the training effect and aerobic and anaerobic and some of the labels. But on the Grid X, it does just give you the trip score. But I do like the Training Load Pro on the Grid X because I feel like they assess your history and your development a little bit more accurately. So we're going to look at a hands-on of the app, one by, side by side, the Garmin app versus the Polar app. But I feel like overall, you can see some of the differences between the two devices so far. Okay, so looking at the apps side by side and just being able to get a gauge for how the apps display your experience. This is not exhaustive, but somebody mentioned they'd like just an overview. On the Garmin, you get basically a summary of stats that basically breaks down different aspects of the day. I like the body battery, so you can reorder how they appear. The body battery just gives you that accumulation of how much stress you've been under and how it's worn your body down over time, which I find really helpful. The sleep app, it doesn't accumulate the sleep stats into a score, which doesn't make it as useful. It's just sort of static information for how much you slept, but it does have pulse ox, so you can see your oxygen level throughout the night as well as your respiration rate, and you can track it over a period of days. So when you compare that to the Polar, you have this nightly recharge and you also have the sleep. So the sleep, it assesses it in a bunch of details based on your moving averages and gives you a sleep score. A lot of really useful information, but the best part about it is not only does it just give you this breakdown of the stats, but it summarizes, whether it was good or bad by the sleep score itself. So you can see a weekly summary, you can go back and see your weekly stats over a period of time as well as your range of sleep. So you obviously very short during the week and one long one on the weekend. So it gives useful information there, whereas on the Garmin, you obviously you can see your stats over a period of time, but mostly in one day. That's how to calculate sleep. You have your calories. Here it's sort of beneficial on the Garmin. You can see your resting and your active, totaling the total summary calories. And then on the Polar, you just get this stat for the day where it just shows you your basic calories burned, whether it's done through activity or whether it's done through just overall resting heart rate. I mean, you basically, your standalone calories that you would burn just being alive. Respiration rate you can see throughout the day. You can jump into heart rate analysis. You can see heart rate analysis by going up here. You can see how it summarized the heart rate throughout the day. So you get that similar stat when you go into the Garmin on the heart rate details. Take a second just to shows you your resting and your high for the day. Floors, you can obviously count your stairs, which it doesn't account for on the Polar system. Here I have it tracked to a weight scale, so that's another added benefit. You have your step goal, and you can obviously see your steps here as well. Steps 2,600, steps 2,800. It always comes in within a relatively reasonable similar amount, so there's no big differences there. The one thing about Polar is you'll see, and I'll show you on a workout, you just get this summary of information in this big, huge screen, whereas you get it blocked off and segmented on the Garmin system. Garmin does track your heart rate variability throughout the day, so you can see your stress. If you had a more stressful day, you get just a calculation or assessment of how much stress you were under throughout a period of time. Just takes a second to load. Some days more accurate than others. And then you can add activities, hydration. You can also see summary of past events. So we'll look at just a CrossFit workout from a few days ago. You can see a summary of the last 7 days. Whereas on the Polar system, you have your basic summaries. You can see over the course, you can see just different stats up at the top. But either way, you get a summary for the day, and you can go into summary for the week, and it'll show you accumulation periods over time, and a summary for the month, which will show you, accumulation periods over a longer period of time. So it's somewhat neat to be able to see these aspects at a long-range thing. You can see it similarly on the Garmin as well as you can dive in. One of the things you'll notice about the tabs, though, is on the Polar app, you get these basic tabs. You have activity, which is, starts with just that basic summary of the day, if it'll ever go back. And you just get sleep, nightly recharge, and training. There are some other tabs, but they don't really relate to anything that's like training and fitness development wise. But on the Garmin, so we'll go back to the top. This is the basic landing page, and you get your performance details. So you can go into training status. This is normally appears on the My Day at a Glance. So here's, you can see training status, but you can also see VO2 max trends over time, training effect trends over time, like how much workout effect over a period of time. Some of these other aspects relate to running, which doesn't relate as much to CrossFit tracking, so I'm not going to get into them. Pulse ox acclimation, and then you have your health slaps. So you can health stats, sleep, weight, calories, pulse ox, respiration. You can get into all the details of any one of these aspects over a prolonged period of time. When you're tracking these things, you can see what they summarize as over a period, and you can dive into a detail, and then you get to the activities. So here in the activities, I just go typically into the summary of all activities, and we'll just take a more true CrossFit workout, which was just a 37-minute, 10-round thing. So when you get to an activity on the Garmin system, you get this summary of the stats on the first page. I don't know why they don't put it all in one page, and then you get the detailed stats on a different page. When you compare that to the Polar, so you go into the training program, and so this is looking at something from last week. So you scroll back a week, and then you look back at the same workout on the Polar app. Now this is the chest strap, so this is the H10, because I deleted the Grit X summary of stats because the Grid X did not calculate heart rate very accurately for this workout. It had me at like 128 beats per minute average going down. You can't see the training zones here, but it had me at a much lower peak zone, so it was not calculating the highest level of intensity, whereas on the Garmin, you can see that it put a lot of the time in the red zone, the zone 5, which obviously assesses how much strain you put on your body. You can see the training effect here. Here on the training effect, you go into the Training Load Pro, and you can see it summarized it with a score of 105. So on the Garmin system, you get a 0 to 5 on both aerobic and anaerobic. On the Polar system, you get somewhat of a generic number. It's related to, your workout fitness level, but it still is just a generic number that will fluctuate anywhere from very low to, to high, and it tells you a score, but it doesn't give you, this is just showing you the cardio load over a period of time, but it doesn't give you like a max out number to be able to assess if you were really pushing it. So I was really pushing it in this workout. It was very difficult in this 10-round workout. Here you just have sort of a score. When you do a workout through the watch, or you have the watch paired to a chest strap and it comes up, then you won't get this gray fit fat range of areas. You'll get actually all the same colors that you would get on a primary heart rate tracking. But here you can just see the sort of summary, but this is what it shows you. It shows you a red block. If you're a runner or a biker, this red block will be like 10 pages long and just has a bunch of different stats, but they're not sort of summarized into different areas or fields. So here you can see the areas or fields in different different pieces. So it just sort of takes each piece and puts it into a color pattern or, segmented item. So this is much easier to read. You can summarize your workout a little bit more clearly than just seeing a bunch of stats in one block screen where you have to consciously think about what you're reading on each one of the stats. When you go back to the overall workouts themselves, and you go into load. So this is the last aspect we'll look at. You can see your load over time. So you can see the red is just the workouts that applied strain to your heart. The purple is how much strain accumulation you have over a period of time, and the blue is how much your overall fitness level is, taking into account the last 28 days. So you can see it was just saying I was overreaching. There was a period of time where I had to take time off because of an injury. And then the other thing that's nice about how they do the cardio load that I've shown in other is you can track this across time. So obviously, it showed my overall strain level dropped, as well as the blue line dropped, which is my fitness level, which is what they call the tolerance, how much strain you can handle because your fitness is at a certain level. So it dropped off because I had to take a little over a week off due to injury. But you can see I peaked it back up, and obviously the strain is tracking back over a 7-day period. But this is fantastic to be able to see what goes into a load calculation over a period of time, and that's something that Polar does really well. When you compare that to Garmin, and you have to go into the training status. Now this tab usually appears on the My Day at a Glance, and I'm not sure, obviously you haven't worked out today, so it's just not populating today. To get this to list as productive or maintaining or any of the other labels that would come with a summary of it, you have to run a couple times a week, and I typically will just run 5 minutes twice a week. Not at a hard pace because it's got to have a VO2 max to give a baseline comparison, but here's the basic summary. So you have your VO2 max. It shows you over a period of time, like trends for what your VO2 max is. I wasn't testing a Garmin in the last few weeks as much, but over 12 weeks, you can see a period of, the VO2 max development. The other thing is on the load. So you can see the load calculates over a period of time, and you have this same 7-day load, which assesses if you're in the green, if you're training optimally or not. And if I was to do another hard workout today, it would probably pop me outside of the green and say I was overreaching. The other thing that's frustrating about the Garmin system is you actually have to track it based on the device. Now, I deleted a bunch of the device after I get done testing them, but if you track a load, it just shows you the assessment of the load calculation from the singular device, whereas the Polar, this is accumulation of a bunch of different devices, whether it was the Ignite or the Vantage V in different periods of time, just tracking different devices. It just all comes into the same load because I'm the same human being, whereas on the Garmin, you just get segmented load based on the device use itself. It does do, you can see here one thing that's nice about the 945 and the Phoenix 6 series, you can see your load scores, you can see the type of benefit that you experience from it, and it just continues to give you that load focus for how you're developing or what your workouts are mostly, how they're, categorized mostly. But either way, that shows you, I haven't used heat acclimation because I'm not a runner, more CrossFit, but you can see at least how you're developing over time, and you have to go in a few levels to be able to see your load accumulation, and it's actually more easily found on the watch. But this gives you just a basic breakdown of how the different apps come together, how they supply information from the course of a day, what tabs are available, and how you can see different specifics Again, the nightly recharge, you know, the ANS recharge, which is that autonomic nervous system. But you can see just how the apps summarize all the details. Just to give you an idea of what the app experience would be like, here you can turn any of these little details on and off. You can go into the very bottom and say edit my day and change what you see. You can see nice little summary trends over time. And the Garmin is just much broader and wider of a platform, whereas the Polar is a little bit more streamlined and simple. It's not necessarily lesser, it's just not as customizable. It doesn't have, you know, they don't break down the information as usefully, but otherwise, you know, they're just a different platform, a different experience. So you'll see your fitness, you know, your workouts throughout the week, like a training log in the training log, obviously, but then it ties in directly to the load you're experiencing itself. So basic summary, and also the summary, you can see just what the stats look like when they're coming from each of the devices. So again, the Garmin, you're seeing these specific stats on the training status because we're looking at the 945. If you did the 245, some of these would be more simplified and this whole load detail would not be filled in. The Fenix 6 has that. If you're using the Garmin Forerunner 45, it doesn't have load calculation, so you won't get this, nor will you get it with the Venue or the Vivo Active 4, which is why, you want to use a 245, 945, or maybe a 645. The 645 doesn't include the body battery evaluation, so I find that to be useful. But this is a summary of the two apps side by side. I'm going to probably post this as its own singular video, as well as attach this to the review or the comparison of the 945 and the Grid X. Again, you can see more details on the website, CrossFitTracking.com. And if you like this, find it useful, please like it, as well as subscribe for more videos. We're going to be doing the final Grid X comparison or review in about a week. So thanks so much for following CrossFitTracking.com.